Okay. Well, I guess I should kick off. And thank you so much, Susie. So Susie is joining us from the Brisbane office, and she's basically the brains behind this operation. So she's our technical support. She's our amazing communications person. So she basically keeps everything running. My name's Hannah Etchells. I'm from the Queensland Fire and Biodiversity Consortium, which sits within Healthy Land and Water. And I'm a fire ecologist. So I run the state training program for Queensland, basically teaching and empowering landholders just like you guys on bushfire ecology, management, and how to keep yourself prepared and educated and engaged and having a good plan, basically, because that's what sort of today is all about. And hopefully at the end of this evening, you'll go away with some really great information, a lot of information actually after this evening, and then even more detailed information after the property fire management planning workshop, which is in about 10 days' time, which we'll talk about more at the end of today. So I just quickly wanted to introduce the other people who are going to be chatting with you guys today. So here we've got Peter from the local council. Peter, do you just want to say hello and introduce yourself?
If my mic is working, yeah. G'day everybody. I'm part of the Land for Wildlife or the Conservation Partnerships team. So our focus is conservation land management on private land, and we do our best to spend our money helping people, I guess, with education and on-ground sort of technical advice.
Cool. Thank you, Peter. And I'll get Megan to give a little intro.
Hi, my name is Megan. I'm a rural firefighter and volunteer community educator with Rural Fire Service down in Southeast region, and here today to do a little bit of a Prepare, Act, Survive presentation and talk about our Australian fire danger rating system and warnings.
Thank you so much, Megan. And I just wanted to acknowledge that today we're meeting on the traditional lands of a variety of different traditional owners. So I'm actually coming to you guys from Darumble country up in Yeppoon because I'm up here running some workshops. But I know that everyone's coming from different parts of land that was and continues to be traditional custodian looked after, basically. And so, yeah, just wanted to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And yeah, we'll get cracking. So this is the schedule for this evening, if it goes on to the next slide. Eventually. Interesting. So just, there we go, there it is. So this is the agenda for this evening. So we've done our welcome and our housekeeping. I've introduced people. And so we're going to run through, first of all, we're going to hear from Peter, and he's going to talk about bushfire program and local laws, as well as different partnerships within council. And then Megan is going to run through the Prepare, Act, Survive demonstration and presentation. And then I'm going to have a chat about fire ecology, fire regimes and fire intervals. So stay tuned. Hopefully we'll be finished up around 7:15, so you can have yourself some dinner or supper or your favourite show on TV or whatever that might be. Yeah, I will stop sharing now and I'll pass over to Peter, who is going to have a chat with you guys for the next 15 minutes or so.
I've got a fair bit to cover tonight, so I'm actually going to apologise in advance for being fairly quick. The idea being that council actually covers a fair amount of fire management stuff from various different angles. What I'm going to go through are council's responsibilities from a planning perspective, also from an on-ground perspective in terms of management in our own parks and reserves, and last but probably more importantly for me is education. and empowering people to make the good decisions about fire management planning on their own blocks for their own safety and protection of themselves and their assets, of course. So I'm going to start off with the Logan planning scheme, and that's basically divided into two different types. Rules and regulations about planning in terms of subdivision development, but also there's a fair amount of information involved in planning scheme protection for vegetation and planning scheme vegetation management stuff, which includes a fair bit of mapping and also a number of exemptions as well. So to begin with, bushfire hazard mapping, that's basically one of the layers that overlays everything. You can see the white areas are low fire, yellow areas are medium hazard. In here, there's a lighter red, which is actually high, and then the very high stuff is the red, and it's concentrated around the bushland areas, the mountainous areas.
If you can hear us, Peter, we can't see. We're just seeing planning in bushland prone areas, nothing else, no map.
No map. You're looking at the front slide again. Okay, I'm sorry.
Yes, that's all right. So
right. I'm going to stop sharing and reboot it. Righto. Okay, so we've been through the fact that we've got planning for fire and we have got vegetation protection and management. There's the hazard map. How's that looking? Do people see that?
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, that's it. So we have got the higher the red, the higher the bushfire hazard risk. And it's mountainous country to the west. I don't know if you can see my cursor or not. Mountainous country to the east. And that really corresponds very much with vegetation protection, which I'll go into in more detail later on. But basically, the pink is the highest level of vegetation protection and the green is moderate vegetation protection. Now, these are part of the planning scheme. They're not part of any council. They're not part of any state government vegetation laws. And that covers vegetation communities, but we also want to cover ecological processes. So what you're looking at here is the planning scheme map of the dark green zones are environmental and conservation management zones. The green lines are ecological corridors, which are built into the planning scheme, as are the blue ones, which are waterways corridors. So there's connectivity there that allows genetic transfer over time. So that's important from a planning scheme as well. And this entire lot on the very western side there, Greenbank military area, it's all part of the Flinders to Greenbank to Karawatha corridor, which is a state biodiversity corridor. So that's got to be looked after through the planning scheme as well. All right, we have a bushfire code. Very quickly, it allows us to do a number of things in terms of planning for bushfire hazard. Allotment design, vehicle access. Now that's pretty important for people to evacuate, but also to get maintenance vehicles in. Fire maintenance, as in fire trucks and stuff like that. We make sure there's accessible water supply, and there's a couple of other functions that are part of that. Very quickly, I'm sure the other presenters will be going through this in more detail. I just wanted to give you some examples of how the development has progressed in recent years. Fires are an issue because of radiant heat from direct flame contact and from amber attack. And from this, you can see modern planning now, we have a ring road around residential blocks. There's the ring road there. So it's a separator and an ingress and egress for fire vehicles and stuff like that. We can also specify a setback distance, which means that your residences are actually a certain distance away from anything that might be a fire hazard. This is what it looks like in an urban area. There's your roadway. In a rural area, same kind of deal. You'll notice here, this is what we'd call a fuel-free zone. The outer protection area is fuel reduced. Now that's really important because you'll notice there's a significant lack of fine fuels at ground level and a significant lack of what we call ladder fuels, which are the sort of fuels that allow fires in the hazard area to climb into a canopy. So this is a protection area in its own self. And here is what it looks like now. Down the bottom here, you can see this is the old way we used to do things with vegetation right up to the houses. And even though that's a small patch of vegetation, there is still a significant risk. Whereas this particular area here that is a new development has a ring road for evacuation, the ring road for fire maintenance vehicles, and we also add to it where we can open areas like parklands and waterways. And you can see that there's a fire control line through this section through here as well. Okay, so I apologise for being very quick. That's a taste of the planning side. We'll go on to vegetation management. We have a definition of a clearing, which incidentally does not include vegetation destroyed by stock, but it does include dead vegetation as well as living vegetation. So clearing of that vegetation is subject to a number of conditions, I guess, development conditions. Vegetation protection layer. This is the one I showed you before. So the pink stuff is basically protecting all native vegetation, including that dead stuff that I spoke to you about. Secondary vegetation here, anything that is taller than 4 meters in height and of a certain width. I wouldn't worry too much about the details at the moment. There's a huge amount of information that's available. The best thing you can do is have a chat to the guys in the development assessment section in council. They are here to help. That protects at a very broad scale. At a more a finer scale in terms of ecological processes, there are overlays for locating those biodiversity corridors and waterway corridors that I spoke of earlier. And there is a process of application whereby you can get your own exemptions for clearing if you need to. Here's an example of clearing. So for around a dwelling, a clearing exemption of 10 meters, that's your fuel free zone, and then an additional 10 meter fuel reduced zone, and it's a bit smaller for other kind of buildings like sheds and stuff. And of course, along fence lines. So there are set distances depending on the size of your block, and again, it's fairly complicated stuff. So really urging people, if you need to do that sort of stuff, talk to council. You'll get two benefits out of that. You'll get permission in writing, which you can wave around to people if you like. And we quite often get calls when people are felling vegetation. If the development assessment guys are aware of the fact that you have applied for an exemption, or that you're even doing stuff that you're allowed to do anyway, at least they know about it. They can answer all those phone calls that come in. So I guess this is a summary of that. If you need to clear vegetation, have a chat to council. If you needed an application, even if you don't need an application, have a chat to them, because those guys are really there to help. They're not really going to stop you doing things that you need to do, particularly where there's a safety concern. So that's the end of that one. I'll see if I can click on that. Yes, are you still looking at that particular screen? If I shut that one down and I open up the other one, let's see what we get there. No, you're not going to open, are you? All right, I'm going to, have I stopped sharing my screen? According to this, I have.
Yes, you're no longer sharing at the moment, but you did, there was a moment there where you had the other one up, actually. So I think you nearly got there.
It's a big file, and I really think that yeah, it seems to have disappeared altogether.
Oh, could you do it via interpretive dance, perhaps?
I am going to close it down. I had this problem when I was practicing as well. So I'm going to close it down and I'm going to reopen the thing. And apologise. Here we go. Righto. I'm going to share the screen again. I'm going to share that one. Looking good. Let's go to full presentation mode. Right. How's that looking? Sweet as. Beautiful. All right. All right. We'll start off with parks fire management. And this is probably the one that most people think of when they think about council and fire management, is our programs in terms of looking after the bushland and the fuel build up in parks and reserves. Just waiting for this first slide to roll over. But as you can see there, they've got a number of different programs. And to be honest with you, they're really very advanced in terms of fire management compared with local councils, a number of local councils in the southeast area. We have nearly 1,000 parks. And if you can see that map properly, you can see that the green areas are very well spread out, and they're also long and linear. A lot of them are, which makes fire management actually a significant issue. Therefore, we spend a lot of time talking. You can see that we liaise extensively with other landowners in the city, as well as local brigades, parks and wildlife, and even neighbouring councils where we're needed. We have 150 kilometres of fire control lines. I call them fire control lines rather than fire breaks because they don't actually work that way. We have a huge planned burn program. There are a lot of areas that we can't burn for various reasons, so we manage the fuel through alternative methods in those areas. And we also have a bushfire response, so that's responding to fires that aren't planned. We've got in excess of 20 staff now, and 4 amazing trucks that are just the state of the art. So the process for planned burns is quite complicated. So we'll look at the city as a whole. We will spend a lot of time communicating. We prioritise areas. We'll go out on site. We will have a look at the size of the site. We'll look at access. We'll look at the ecology. For argument's sake, there might be endangered plants in the area or special areas with nesting boxes and things like that. We will go through a number of other steps in the planning process, probably out on site again for the burn preparation works. For example, stick raking around habitat trees that we don't want to burn, that sort of stuff. As an example of the communication, we send a lot of stuff to neighbouring residents. We do social media posts quite often. We will liaise with internal branches. Of course, the councillors will be involved, and on the day there'll be on-site signage as well. We also have a bushfire response crew. So those guys are basically there for assisting Queensland Fire and Emergency Services if needed. In those instances, the incident control is actually under the auspices of Queensland Fire and Emergency Services. We will stand by as needed for mopping up and stuff afterwards. Our guys are only trained for vegetation fire, so we'll have nothing to do with infrastructure. And we get about 15 to 30 requests for assistance a year, which is actually quite a fair bit when you think about it. Okay, since 2015, and I say this is up till 2021, we've done 256 hectares of park burnt with no incidences, because these guys are all top-notch, well-trained, and continue with training. So that is our parks on ground planning and operational stuff. I'm now going to go on to our environmental conservation partnerships. This is non-public land. Our focus is private land, and the reason we focus on private land is because there's an amazing amount of really good ecology on private land these days. So our focus is empowering people to look after this, to recognise what cool stuff they've got, and to give them the funding and the education to be able to look after it as best they can, I guess. So there's a map of our environmental conservation partnerships. We, as I said, focus on capacity building. We have a range of partnerships stretching from small urban backyards through the peri-urban areas, large blocks, super huge blocks. This one up here is Greenbank Military Training Area. That's a special one. That's almost 5,000 hectares as it is. And we also have partnerships that are binding on title. So they're covenants, which means that the area that you set aside there is actually binding on future owners as well. In terms of that overlaid with the bushland fire hazard, you can see there's a huge importance on fire planning and education for people within our partnerships program, which is why we're all here tonight. What else do we offer? Okay, our partnerships. This is a plug for the whole program. Just when we've got people here, we supply site visits. We supply specialist advice from us, which are trained in all sorts of ecology. We offer material support. You can see that there's free plants, nesting boxes, herbicide backpack sprayers, that kind of stuff. And we also run a grants program, which a number of you may have heard about, if not participated in. In addition, we offer education. So you're looking at photos of wildflower walks there. We have open days, networking events, workshops, as well as the production of a number of educational booklets, which are basically available free to partners as well. Just winding up, if you need to know anything about any of this stuff, simple thing is to get in contact with council. If you're interested in further information and the notes from tonight, I'm quite happy to send these out as well to participants. And hopefully we're on time. How's that going?
Yeah, that was amazing. Thank you so much, Peter. You've made perfect time. We've got time for one question, and we've got a question here already in the chat.
Awesome.
So Jamie has asked, I live on a block that is just under an acre, where the rear of the block backs onto a creek. It's heavy bush with no break. So judging by the diagram that you showed earlier, is it correct that I don't need a fire break between my fence because I'm under 1 hectare? Or would you have other more specific advice for Jamie?
Okay, I would like to see that in particular, and perhaps Jamie can get in contact with me through council. But if having a creek line is good, because they don't burn as much as an open paddock, for argument's sake. The stuff's usually moister, but it depends which direction too. Our prevailing fire weather comes from the west, so if that creek line's on the west, then I would probably like to have a closer look and say yes, we probably need to do something about it. Your local fire brigade will be very happy to give you information on along those lines as well.
Thank you. That's great info. It sounds like a lot of these questions perhaps might be better addressed on a case-by-case basis, because as I'm sure everyone's just got an understanding for, these things are not necessarily simple. And, you know, we like to take a really measured and considered approach that takes into account the intricacies of everyone's different situations. So there's one more question that we have time for. So Margaret has asked, do you do planned burning in Springwood Environmental Park?
I'm going to, that's a tricky one, actually. It's a state government park. It's a state government park, but I'm pretty sure that our guys are in there doing maintenance. So yes, if it'll be on the roster, whether it's a high priority one or not, I'm not sure, Margaret. It's a fairly large park, and it's also fairly steep. So that does add to the fire risk. Having said that, it's not connected to a lot of stuff. So unless we've got school holidays happening and there's likelihood of fires in there, that sort of reduces the risk a bit. But again, please get in contact with me and we'll have a look at it in detail, and we can give you contact details for the parks guys who actually look after that area, and they'll be able to answer it a whole lot more detail than I can.
Thank you, Peter. Does anyone have any live questions they want to chuck their microphone or camera on and ask us quickly, or ask Peter quickly? If not, I guess I thought I'd jump in and say that, particularly in regards to Jamie's question, that's exactly the sort of detail that we're going to be going into at the individual property fire management planning workshop that's happening on Saturday, May 18th. So Jamie, you sound like somebody who really should come along to that, because you'll get an individualized map of your property, and we'll map out your vegetation and your fire hazard and that sort of thing. And we can get really stuck into the details of the specificities of your block and what's required.
Yeah, good idea.
And yes, Jamie's just asked, how can I enroll? So we're basically get in contact with us now. Send Peter or myself an email, and we'll show you how to sign up via Eventbrite for the property fire management planning workshop.
Well, actually, even better than that.
Even better.
Everyone who's here tonight will get a follow-up email, and we'll have a link on there that'll take you straight to where you register for the workshop itself.
Amazing. How's that for technology?
Sorry, Anna.
So yeah, that's great. No, it's awesome. So when was the last bushfire in Logan? That's a question that's just come in from Mike. Hopefully that's a quick one to answer before we pass over to Megan.
The last lot of significant ones we had was 2019, I think, at the end of that dry spell, and yeah, the whole of the east coast of Australia was suffering. But yeah, we did have some significant stuff, particularly around the Greenbank area, if I recall.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you so much, Peter. So we've got a couple more questions, but we'll save them to the end when we have some more time. So we'll just pass over now to Megan, who is going to take us through the Prepare, Act, Survive that the Rural Fire Service presents to you guys, and gives you some great advice about what you can do to keep yourself safe. So Megan, hopefully.
Give me 2 seconds. There we go. I think I got my mic. I just
Wonderful.
It's technology. Alrighty, so I'm gonna have a go sharing my PowerPoint, but I may have the same issues because I will have to swap between PowerPoint and Google Chrome because I have a few things open. So let's just try to see if this presents first. So, oh, there we go. Nope, that did not do what it wanted to do. I think I have dual screens up, so it's playing up with me. Here we go, PowerPoint. All right. Is that working?
Yeah, that looks great.
Okay, awesome. I'm just gonna slide this down so I can see that. Alrighty. So I've seen from the previous slideshow, you've gone a bit into the actual bushfire preparation. I'll go a little bit more into probably after the fact and also how you can help prepare before the fact. So just an introduction if anyone wasn't there at the start. My name is Megan. I am a rural firefighter and volunteer community educator down in Southeast region. I'm actually down at a Gilson Advanced Town, which is in the Gold Coast area, but have been to Logan a few times, so I do know the area a little bit. And also my paid role, I do work for public information and warnings with Queensland Fire Emergency Services. So if you have any more questions about that side of it, I'll be able to help assist with those too. So getting into it, let's see if this will, oh, didn't like my keyboard. Alrighty, cool. So Prepare, Act, Survive. It's a motto that we use to pretty much say it's your responsibility at the end of the day to make sure your property is prepared for bushfire. And if your home is threatened, whether you stay or whether you go, and what you should make sure of before and after the event. So a little bit of information about fire. So depending on your property, if you're on different sorts of terrain, so we've got this slide, I guess doesn't show a lot, but this is an example of how slope can impact fire behavior. So increased fuel loading can make a fire progress quicker, or it could be because of slopes or terrain. So in this one, it's showing you how just that 20 degrees of slope has increased the fire speed 4 times. So as a rule of thumb, 10 degrees of slope is double the rate of spread. Things like what type of terrain it is. So if you have grass backing onto your property, it's more likely to go quicker, may not sustain for as long though, etc. And these are all the sort of things that with your property you need to assess what sort of terrain you have around you, what sort of slope you have, how far that is from your house. It's really good to see from Peter's presentation that that is being taken into account with current planning at the moment. So vegetation isn't backing up onto houses, but there is a lot of rural houses that are right in the middle of bush, as we saw at Beachmont. And that was half the issue with the Beachmont fires, is where the properties were, is right on where the bush finished. And we had to make a decision whether we can save that house or we had to go, because at the end of the day, we can't risk our life for a property that's unsavable. So making sure that your property is prepared, so having that distance between your house and vegetation was the difference between whether that house could be saved or not in most cases. So, and this is, yeah, a bit about leaving late. So QFS will make a really, we do a lot of work to make sure we get our information and our warnings out to the community in time. But at the end of the day, this is where you need to assess, is my property, am I able to leave my property quickly? Am I in the middle of bush? Do I have a long driveway back to the road? Do I have those protections in place to give myself time to leave, or should I pre-plan to leave early? So moving, I can't use my keyboard to change slides. Give me a second. There we go. So as Peter was saying in his presentation, there's, I think the statistic was 90% of houses that were impacted by bushfire were due to embers. So even from things from leaves, fires, hot, creates its own, my brain's, sorry, my brain, has a bit of an updraft of wind, blows the embers, they land in your gutters. Suddenly you've got a fire starting in your gutters that can spread through, yeah, fire in your house. Or if there's open windows, open doors, vents, all those sort of things where embers can get into and sit and start a fire. That is how we've lost many houses. And then, yeah, obviously you have direct flame contact, and there's also radiant heat. I think people underestimate how much radiant heat impacts properties. Don't have the statistic in front of me of the distance, I suppose. But there is a reason why that distance, not just for embers, it's not just for the direct flame contact, but it's also making sure that the heat from that fire is as far away from your house as possible. There we go. Alrighty, so, oh, sorry, my workplace has automatic lights, so they just went off and then had to wave. Alrighty, so bushfire survival plan. So when we're starting to look into bushfire survival plan, it's thinking about what you have in your house that's important, and what you will need if a bushfire strikes. So I think the next slide has some of the items. So go through, bring that slide up actually. It's probably easier to look at it than it is to try to explain it. Here we go. So having clothing around the house that you know you can wear, that is wouldn't say fire protectant, don't ever just rely on clothing, but using natural fibers. So avoiding your polyesters, so getting a cotton shirt or a wool shirt, those sort of clothing items, or at least something that's long and protecting from any, say, embers falling, the heat of it, etc. So having clothing ready is a very key thing, covered shoes, of course. Then also having all your important documents ready. So you may have already prepared for this for other hazards, like when you have floods, etc., as we're all very well aware of. Having those things in a safe space that's easy to collect them from. So your phone, your passport, key documents. Having a radio. Radios are really important. So if we lose connectivity, QFS has a understanding with ABC radio and other local radio stations, so that if we put a warning out about your area, they will broadcast that message over their networks. So being tuned into ABC or another radio channel is actually really important to make sure you have the most up-to-date information. And of course, radio and channels, etc., have a little bit more freedom on what they can say. So they can say our official QFBC messaging, but they may have even more information that maybe we can't put out in a public post, which I'll get into a little bit later. And then getting into, yes, making sure you have your medications, water, firefighting equipment. It may be worth having a fire blanket, multiple purpose, can be used to keep you warm, can also be used to suppress small fires that could be nearby, although if you probably don't want the fire nearby, you want to already be away from that. Yeah, so I would have loved to give out physical books, bushfire safety guides. I have a QR code at the end, or I can send it out to people, the electronic copy, which has this information in there. Just move on to the next slide. So another way to help keep yourself and keep your mind prepared for what could potentially come is the new fire danger rating system. So I'm sure most of you remember our old signs had 6 different ratings, and to be honest, most of us couldn't remember what to do at each of those different levels. And a lot of the time what was happening was those lower levels were being ignored when they were so important. For example, that high rating down in Southwest, so where, well, not really Southwest, where Miles and Mooney, Tara, where all those fires were recently, they only had a fire danger of high in many of those cases, and they still had really, really bad fires that were dangerous. So you do need to, when you see that level of high, you need to be starting to think about, what am I going to do if a bushfire starts? Another change with this system coming up, so they've obviously reduced from 6 levels to 4, and now it's consistent across the entire country. But they've also introduced a no rating. So that little white section at the bottom there under moderate, if the fire danger is not, if it's like raining, it's raining extensively, or if it's not worth, I suppose, having a level, they'll now have a no rating section for those days. So that means when you start to get into moderate, that is when you do need to start preparing. So moderate, plan and prepare, fires can still start. You still need to be ready to act. High, you definitely need to be ready to act. If things happen, they can go off for many different reasons. I'm sure at your information day, they will get into a little bit more about fuel loading and how much fuel loading has increased over the past few years with all this rain. But that's why it's so important with this upcoming potential fire season that you listen to these ratings. Extreme, take action now. And when you get into this extreme and catastrophic ratings, unless you are fully confident your house is repaired, you probably should already be thinking or leaving your property. Once it gets to extreme or catastrophic, there may not be a chance for you to be safe to stay home. And you've also got to think, do I have mobility issues? Is a safe place I have to go far away from where I am? What roads you would have to drive on? Is it a one-way in, one-way out road? Do I live on a mountain? All those sort of things. You want to be already having that in mind before we get to those ratings and already acting. Sorry, I'm racing through this a little bit just so I get everything in time, but I will have a few things at the end to sort of spruce up. So getting into the warning side. So Queensland Fire Emergency Services have adopted the Australian warning system. So just for tonight, they will focus on bushfire warnings. So bushfire warnings have changed a little bit over the past few years. Essentially, we've got rid of notifications and now we will issue warnings when there is a need for the community to act. So the lowest level we have is an advice. So that's when there's no immediate danger, but you need to stay up to date with the situation. So we issue these for when there is a smoke hazard. So when smoke is impacting your community, we will issue an advice avoid smoke warning. This could be for hazard reduction burn. We can do them for other agencies' burns too. So if Logan City Council or Queensland Parks and Wildlife Service are doing a burn and it's producing a significant amount of smoke impacting a community, we can issue a warning for that. But it isn't the only way to see what's happening. So don't rely on warnings as a way to know if an incident is happening. Sometimes you might see smoke, but it's not impacting a community significantly, so there won't be a warning. So that's where using Logan City Council's social media channels or your local Rural Fire Brigade social media channels. There's a few other resources out there and on the QFBC website may be more appropriate. And stay informed is when it's getting a little bit more serious. Situation could change, but it's not at a point where it's threatening properties yet. And next slide. Once we get to the Watch and Act, this is where, especially if you have those perhaps mobility issues or other issues I was mentioning earlier, you may already, well, you probably should already be leaving. Watch and Act is, we've got one main level called prepare to leave. At the moment, you may also see a call to action called monitor conditions, but that will be changing a little bit. So I've just taken that out of the slide for tonight. We'll focus on this one as this is probably the more key one. So once it starts to get to a point where it could impact properties within the coming day, by the afternoon, etc., the Watch and Act level warnings will start to be in place. And like I said before, mobility issues, treat this as the next level up because you don't want to leave it to the last minute to leave and wait for that emergency warning. Alrighty, and getting into the last slide. So emergency warning. If you see an emergency warning, don't second guess it, just leave. If the warning, we put a warning area in place for where it needs the people that need to leave. But if you're on the edge of that and you're still not feeling comfortable with the fact that there's an emergency warning near you, it's probably advisable to leave anyway and just get to a safe place so you can feel comfortable. And also just keeping in mind with these types of warnings, if the fire is that intense and getting that close, there's also that smoke hazard at every level. And smoke is actually what took the most lives in the 2019-2020 fires. I think, I don't remember the exact number, I think it was maybe 3,000 people hospitalized. I'd have to double check the stat exactly, but it was the main cause of hospitalizations and I think even death. So while it's a really sad fact, it's something we really got to keep in mind that you really need to be going before it gets to this level. I don't know if this will play, but this is the sound you should hear if you have like a radio or TV when this warning gets issued. Oh, wait, no, never mind. Okay, that's just let me, let's see if it'll let me play that. No, okay, well, that's okay. We're gonna move on from that one for now, but alrighty. So another way you may get notified about a warning is through an emergency alert. So emergency alerts won't be issued for every warning, and they may not be issued for every single Watch and Act or emergency warning. Emergency alerts are usually used perhaps in instance for the first emergency warning, or if there is a significant update or change to the area. Few different reasons, but the incident controller has the information and discretion to make that call, and we trust them in making that call. So the one thing to keep in mind with emergency alerts is if you enter the area that was warned after this emergency alert was sent out, you will not get the text. That's why it's really important to keep on top of what's happening in your area. Won't go too much more into that, but that's the good stuff. There we go. So community warnings, so a bit more about where to find them. So saying before, you got local radio, community radios, commercial. On television, they will put warnings, information out sometimes too, depending on level, area. A great place to check for current incidents and warnings is the current QFBC website. So I've just put the link in there. You can find that link, just Google current warnings or current incidents, or I can send this out. That is the most up-to-date source. However, sometimes technology doesn't work, so it's also really important to utilize other ways of finding warnings. Facebook is a really good one. We keep them up to date on there. Keeping in mind, old posts don't always get archived, so you may be seeing an old post, so just checking the map or scrolling to the top of the Facebook feed on QFBC page just to double check that's the most current one. In severe level warnings, we will add a message to say that it's no longer current, though. Just don't rely on that all the time. And there's also things like community meetings and door knocking. So you can't expect that a firefighter is always going to get to your house, but generally if there is a community at risk, we do, and we have to go through and try to get everyone out. Situations where it might be large manor houses, so they may not be able to get to yours quickly, you may need to leave more time. That's where you need to use these other sources. But I know from Beachmont, we did have to make sure people were out of the house before we actually set up to defend houses. So just everything's changing. All right, moving on to my next slide. So just a little bit about neighborhood safer places. So you can look up neighborhood safer places and get an idea of which ones are in your area before an event. During events, you may see QFBC let you know about, or your local government, one of the two, or both will let you know if there's a place of refuge, an evacuation centre, or neighbourhood safer places available. So place of refuge, I wouldn't say it's like an evacuation centre, but essentially it's just might be a council building that's been set up. So with I've got an example that I'll show you in a moment, but with the fires down at Miles, they didn't have a proper evacuation centre set up, but they set up a place of refuge. So you might hear it called that as well. And neighbourhood safer places, that's pretty much just a large clearing that is a last resort. It's not the preferred method for people to go, but if it's all you have, it's all you have. So it's good to know which ones are in your area before something happens. Alrighty, and yeah, so my friend Christy, who helped prepare the slide, she put this wonderful slide in. Yes, we do not have enough firefighters or fire trucks for every house. And back to that Beachmont example, we had heaps of us there, but it did come down to choosing which houses were defendable and setting up who we had where we could. At the end of the day, resources are limited, and safety wise, it's just not always practical to put that many people in one spot. Awesome. Alrighty, so getting back to a little bit more about the pre-preparation. So I've split this into kind of two. So I've got the first half about with fires. If it's on your property, you need to be responsible for what you do on your property. There's a note in here about a large portion of fires starting with power tools. It is very true. I think there was a man down in New South Wales recently that was very remorseful as he was using a power tool and it's flung sparks out, and he didn't realize he started a grass fire behind him. And it unfortunately was a really nasty fire down there. So you really need to be mindful of what you're doing, where you're doing it on those. And that's where it comes back to that fire danger rating system too. If you see that it's starting to get to higher fire danger, you might start to think, maybe I shouldn't go and mow the lawn today. Maybe I shouldn't do that task of, in the shed or something. And if you are in doubt, talking to your local fire warden or your local rural fire brigade. I noticed there's some council contacts in there as well for that preparation. There's people out there that are willing to help So just making those connections and finding someone you're comfortable to ask those questions. And then as for that pre-preparation, if you are worried that your property is not safe and that you do have that large pile up of vegetation, I think I heard Logan saying that they're going to provide some assistance to that fire management planning workshop to help understand your property and prepare your property. But if you are planning a burn and you want to do a certain area or a stack, usually rural fire brigades are also more than willing to help. We are volunteers though, so don't rely on it. But lots of the time we do love to come out to local landholders for you and for our training too. So I've just put a link in there about fire wardens, and once again, if you just go into the QFBC website and look at fire wardens, you'll find that pretty easily. You can find your local fire warden, or if you can't find your local fire warden easily, I know that says volunteers there, but South Coast is the area office for Rural Fire Service that covers Gold Coast, Logan, Beaudesert, etc. So they can assist they can assist with finding the right fire warden or helping with the permit, but they aren't always staffed, just keep that in mind. And yeah, and creating a bushfire survival plan. So I might just quickly jump over to see if I can swap my screen to show my Google Chrome browser. Just give me 1 second. Alrighty, sorry, share screen. Alrighty, so that's slide there. So there's a website. There's a part of the website on QFBC to create your bushfire survival plan. So I'd recommend either. So I wish I could give you all paper copies right now, but unfortunately I can't. Through either paper copy or online, you can go through and just have a look about putting your details in, your leaving plan, staying plan. You decide to do so, I'm not recommending it. Contingency plan, and it will then give you a bushfire survival plan that you can keep on your fridge or somewhere else you keep your details. And I think I don't have a long left, so I might just I'll just show a couple of these other tabs. So this bushfire survival plan guide, you can ask your local rural fire brigade to provide one as well. I'd recommend, I'll put the QR code up in a moment, but I recommend having a good read through this as it goes into about bushfire, it goes into how is your property at risk, what's around it, etc. I'll just show you some things that I talked about during the night. So for warnings, this is our bushfire and warnings page. So can everyone, yep, see that beautiful. So on there, you can see we have these avoid smokestouts for some hazard reduction burns and one bushfire. But there's also another tab called incidents. So if you see something in your area, it could be a good way to check before calling 000 if you have time. But obviously, if you're in doubt, it's probably best to just call 000. Alrighty. Fire danger ratings. So you can either look at the fire danger rating through the BOM, so the Bureau of Meteorology, have it on their website and their phone app. I do recommend the phone app. It does also do like storm and flood and heat warning notifications to you. But if you don't use that website, or you can use our website to view the fire danger ratings. And you can see at the moment, it does do a summary for the whole region. So that's something to keep in mind. It might not be, could be different in your area. It may be a bit lower, a bit higher, but as a general, they'll go for the higher just to make sure people are properly prepared. And then, yeah, so Cool. I thought I had the fire warden finder up for a second there, but I've lost it, I think. Oh, there we go. So this is another tool. There's a lot of tools on the QFS website. If you do have a little bit of time, it's good to have a play around, look through. There's a lot of resources. And in here, you can even enter your own address and it will tell you your local fire warden. But yeah, so just back to my slide. Can everyone know? No one can see that. I try that again. Alrighty. So I'm just going to share it like that. But yeah, so I'll zoom in for it. There we go. I think that works. I don't know if that works, but I'm like, it's the best I can do. I'm just trying to zoom in.
If someone wants to give it a go, yeah, Peter, try and give that a whack. See if you can download it. Now, if you do want a physical copy of the guide that Megan was talking about, we will have them at the Property Fire Management Planning Workshop, which is an in-person workshop happening on the 13th. Yeah, I've got a stash of them, Megan, even if you can't make it. So we'll have them ready to give out. But yeah, we did have a question for you from Margaret. Now, Margaret originally asked how the warnings were sent out, and I'm guessing, so obviously you talked about how the high level alerts are sent out. But is there a way, I guess, that someone could sign up to even be known when it's just a watch and act, or is that just something that they have to keep their eye on themselves?
That is actually a really good question. So for warnings at the moment, we have the 3 main platforms we distribute on are just Facebook, Twitter. No, let me just open it again so I can show.
Can I just let you know, Megan, that I'm over 70. I don't have Facebook, or I mean, what I said on the message was I don't listen to the radio. I hardly ever watch TV. I don't normally carry my mobile with me. I check it once a day or twice a day. Sometimes for family have rung me or whatever. I don't, so I won't get any of the messages basically.
You're just on mute, Megan. You're still on mute there. I guess something that, oh, there you go, Megan's gonna jump in.
So I think it's because for some reason when I shared my screen, it muted me. So I'm just gonna not share my screen anymore. Yeah, no, I do hear your concerns, and I do completely understand. It is something that is being considered by a team. Unfortunately, the world as it's going has become very technology based. If there is those high level warnings, I'm not going to say always, but most of the time, if there is that concern, you will have volunteer community educators and rural firefighters going around to properties to inform them. Like I said, I can't guarantee that will happen every time, but it does happen, like the fires out in Southwest region. There's not much connectivity out there. There's no network. So there was door knocking done.
I'm accepting of the fact that if a fire came through at night, I just probably wouldn't know about it in time, and that's just the way it is.
Yeah, no, that's it is a hard one. We do have an email distribution list, but that goes to media, Parks and Wildlife, local councils. I'm not sure if the local councils have a way that they assist with distributing warnings. Do you guys have anything that you use to help push out those warnings to your local community as well? Or...
Yeah, but most of it's social media these days. But,
okay.
I'm pretty sure that there'd at least be action.
Yeah, I have my children or grandchildren help me if I need to do something that involves an app. I don't do things like that.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Yeah, if it was life-threatening, I imagine you'd get a knock on the door anyway.
Yeah, if you are worried, I wouldn't encourage this for everyone, but especially if you don't have access to social media or online resources, you can call 000 if you're really concerned. They'll be able to view those resources for you and let you know. 000 is not I suppose, meant to be used as a information line, but if you really do need it, they do have people there all the time, and they will be able to find those resources and let you know what's going on, as a last resort if you can't use any other measure.
I could probably manage to phone someone and ask a question if I saw smoke or something.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Do you know, Margaret, do you know if there's one of those fire danger rating signs anywhere near you that you regularly go past? Have you seen one nearby your house at all? Oh, have we lost Margaret?
I think we did. Yeah, she's not on the participants list. Although in saying that, I don't think all the signs have been rolled out yet. I think that's still in progress at the moment.
I do know that now Peter said there was some in Logan already, or one in Logan.
Some of the Defence Force bases I know have gone ahead and put them in place with a manual sign. But personally, I haven't seen one of the electronic signs yet in my areas.
I was just going to say, because I guess they get updated obviously fairly regularly, and the new ones have that date at the bottom. So you can check, you know, if it's changed since the last time you drove past. So even if you just go to the shops once a week or once every few days, you could drive past it and give it a look and see if it's been updated. If it's gone up, then maybe that's the time to turn on your phone and you know, ask your grandkids or your kids or whatever, get on socials if you can, and just keep an eye on it.
Yeah, we did send out emergency alerts with watch and act level warnings as well during the Southwest region fires, because like there was a lot of people out there that may not be on social media. So
absolutely,
it can be used, and usually the incident controller is the local most of the time, so they will know, they should and usually will know their community pretty well and the limitations. So
I would probably also suggest that Margaret finds out who her local warden is and maybe put that question to him.
Even
that's
if
not a bad idea.
Yeah, even if she finds someone to trust in the local rural fire brigade or fire warden, they would probably be more than willing to help in that situation.
Oh, thank you so much, Megan. Now, does anyone else have any questions for Megan? Feel free to turn off your mute or turn on your microphone and shout out a question for Megan if you've got one. Otherwise, we can move on to the next section, which is me. So, woohoo. Give you a few more minutes. Okay, great. So we'll have like a little bit of time at the end, hopefully, to ask some overall general questions as well. But I will just quickly start sharing my screen and get you guys all loaded up. So we may have the same issue here as what we did before, but let's find out. Now, what can you see?
Presenter's view.
Oh, really? That's so unfortunate. All right, well, that's okay. I don't have any secret notes. So as long as you don't mind being on presenter view. But can you see the agenda at the moment? Is that all good? Okay.
That's on the viewer's view now. That's good.
Oh, it's on viewer's view. All right.
Yep.
Fantastic. Perfect. Great. So here's what we've done so far. And now I'm going to talk to you guys about fire ecology, because that's my background. So I'm originally from Whadjuk Noongar country, which is southwest Australia, and I did my PhD focused on really high severity mega fires. So those sorts of fires that happened over here on the east coast in Black Summer in 2019 and 2020, which I know you guys are all really familiar with. Those are the fires that I studied, and basically I studied how different types of vegetation recover after those big events. I finished my PhD up at the end of 2019, which was kind of wild timing, because then I immediately got scooped up to help out over here with all of the things that were going on, particularly focused on the south coast of New South Wales, which is where I've recently moved from. So now I'm based here in southeast Queensland with you guys, after spending 2 years helping out in the Black Summer recovery, running workshops just like this down there. So I am not a local from here, and I didn't grow up here. So, you know, people like Peter and Megan, and especially people like you guys who actually live here and have done for a long time, are the people with the most relevant knowledge. What I'm going to give you is a broad overview of fire ecology and our understanding of it in Australia. But really, you know, when it comes down to the finer details of it, the people that know the most about this are the people that live on country like you. So at the end of this, we're going to talk about the next step in this process, which is the property fire management planning workshops, where we get really stuck into the nitty-gritty of your individual property, your bush, your risk, your plans, and what we can do going forward to develop a long-term property fire management plan for your country. So you guys know now, I'm sure, that fire is a natural part of the Australian landscape. It's something that's happened always, and it's something that will continue to happen into the future. It's not something that we're ever going to stop. And in fact, we have a lot of ecosystems that really heavily rely on fire for their life cycles, and we're going to talk about those in a bit as well. But what's happened in recent years and what's going to continue to happen in the future is that we're going to see an increase in the frequency and severity of fire events due to climate change. And that's just an unfortunate thing that's going to happen. But that's not to say that it's all doom and gloom. So we're never going to remove this threat of bushfire in Australia. Now, you guys live out in a beautiful part of the world, where I'm sure one of the main reasons you live there is because of the bush, right? Because of the trees, the animals, the birds, the amazing plants. So realistically, if you live in these areas that are so beautiful, you have to accept the fact that at some point bushfire is going to be a reality. But what you can do, rather than sort of be, you know, always scared or not know what to do, is that we're hopefully, you know, over the course of this chat today and the property fire management planning workshop, is give you some practical steps you can take to reduce the impact that fires might have on your property, as well as keeping the bush healthy as well. So one of the ways that we can do this is by managing what we call fuel loads. So fuel loads is, you know, fine fuels, things like twigs and leaves and grasses that catch alight really easily and quickly, but also things like heavy fuels and coarse woody debris, things like fallen branches and trees and things like that, right up to the live trees themselves, particularly under times of drought when they're really dry. They can be fuels as well. And one of the ways that we can manage fuel loads in the Australian bush is actually by using fire strategically and safely in what we call hazard reduction burns, which I'm sure you guys are familiar with because obviously Peter was talking about them earlier and Logan Council practice these throughout the year. But that's not the only way that we can do fuels management. You can also manage your fuels mechanically. So that's like, you know, mowing or slashing, or grazing. There we go, jumped ahead. As well, so you could use things like, you know, go in and you know, rake up and pull together all of your fine fuels, your leaves, your twigs, your branches, and do pile burning. That's how a lot of people tackle this problem. And you can also use grazing. So recently I've been working in some areas out near Ipswich where some people have been using goats in the areas close to their house. So we're not talking about using goats in the sort of pristine bush, because obviously goats are not native species, so that wouldn't necessarily be appropriate. But they're using goats to control the grass and the fine fuels close to their house, rather than having to get the mower out, you know, every week or so. So plus then, you know, goats are cute. You might get some goat milk, you make some cool cheese, some other benefits as well. So when we talk about using fire to manage for fuels, what we're talking about is fire that looks like this. So this is a ecological and hazard reduction burn that took place in Grantchester, so in that same property actually that has the goats in Ipswich. So what you can see from this is that this fire is burning really slowly, really patchy, really cool. the flames are probably not much more than your knee high. This isn't your scary inferno. This isn't your out of control blaze. This is just creeping along the floor of the bush. It's consuming some of those fine fuels, but it's also leaving a patchy mosaic. So it's not leaving all of the earth charred or anything like that. And this is a really successful brigade burn that got done on a private landholder's property. A guy with only a couple of hectares, so maybe similar to some of you guys, what you've got. And it was a really successful ecological burn. So after this, not only did he reduce fuels in the patches that this had burnt, but also he started to see some cool plants come up that he'd never seen before, including an orchid species. So he increased the biodiversity as well by doing something like this. So normally at this point in the fire info night, which normally we do in person, I would pass around a bunch of eucalypt leaves, a bunch of banksia leaves, some casuarina leaves, some acacia leaves, and we would have a chat about how they felt in your hand. So I know you guys live in the bush, so you probably can visualize it. Maybe you can reach out and grab some, I'm not sure. But basically, the reason I do that is because we start talking about sclerophyll vegetation. And if you know any Latin, you might know that sclero means hard and phyll means leaves. So if you've got any of those leaves nearby to have a squeeze of, you'll feel that they're hard. Now, being sclerophilous, one of my favorite words to say, is not only an adaptation to frequent fire, but it's also an adaptation to drought. And it's something that a lot of the Australian bush has, and most of it around you guys, with the exception of rainforest pockets that are there. So if you see parts of the bush that have these sclerophilous leaves, these hard leaves, that means that's an adaptation to frequent drought as well as an adaptation to fire. So on the left here, you'll see a picture of some long unburnt bush. This is some shrubby and grassy wet sclerophyll forest. And what you can see is that not only are there fine fuels on the ground there, so you've got your leaves, your twigs, all that sort of thing, right? But that it's all connected up. And this is what Peter talked about earlier on with these things called ladder fuels. So it's connected up into that understory with these shrubby species in the understory, these fallen twigs and leaves and branches as well. And that connects right up into the canopy. And what happens with vegetation like that that's been left unburnt for more than 40 years is that in times of severe or catastrophic fire danger, when a fire does come through, like what we saw in 2019, 2020 with Black Summer, you can have these really high severity, what we call crown fires, where the fire is carried from those fine fuels on the surface of the forest floor right up through those coarser fuels that are lying down, like your fallen branches and leaves, into the mid-story and that understory, and right up into the canopies of the eucalypts. And so that middle picture is a photo taken 1 year after Black Summer fires. And you can see, and that was an area that had really long unburnt sclerophyll forest. And you can see that those trees completely lost their crowns, so they got completely crown scorched. Now, those trees are doing what's called epicormic resprouting, the ones in this photo. So they're not necessarily all dead. They've managed to survive this fire by putting out these, what we call like emergency leaves that they do not only after fire. So trees can do this after they're stressed by any kinds of things like drought or disease or being poisoned or anything like that. Basically, this, we call it like, you know, the trees are kind of screaming, right? Like they're okay, they're alive, but they're really vulnerable. And bush that looks like this in the middle here takes a long time to recover. And why that's an issue is because we're seeing fires happening more frequently now than they were in the past. So where in the past, you know, this sort of bush, if it did ever burn at this fire severity, might have, you know, a good 10, 20, 30 years, 40 years to recover before another fire came through. But what we're seeing now is the areas that burn at this high severity are actually experiencing more frequent fires subsequently. And because they take longer to regenerate after these extreme high severity events, they're not getting the time that they need before the next fire comes along. So we want to avoid situations that look like this middle picture. And one way we can do that is if you look on this picture on the right, it's the same sort of forest. And this is a photo taken 3 years after a low severity ecological and hazard reduction burn. So something similar to those, that video that I showed earlier. And what you can notice straight away about that is that there's not that connectivity from the ground right up into the crown. So we've reduced some of those fuels, which means that in the case of a really high severity fire danger weather and a fire coming through here, it might still burn, you know, because nothing's going to stop fires like that in their tracks, but it might not burn as extreme. And so by reducing that fuel, we're going to give it the best chance possible to avoid looking like that middle picture. Because what we want is, if it's this type of sclerophyll forest, for it to have this sort of less dense fuel in the understory, so that it doesn't end up looking like this middle picture. So when we talk about fire regimes, and you'll hear people talk about that a bunch once you start, you know, listening to this sort of stuff, all that means is these 4 things: how often fires occur, how hot they are, what time of year they happen, and how big they are, how much area they burn. This one's fairly straightforward. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand this. Hotter fires are more destructive. These are the sorts of fires that crown, that can kill trees, that can damage trees, that can leave bush in a state that takes a lot longer to recover, and that also can have, obviously, a catastrophic impact on human life and property as well. Cooler fires are generally more patchy and more easy to control. So those are the ones that we want. That's what we call good fire. Fire season is really important to consider. Now, where do you guys sit on here? So normally I do this as a bit of an interactive thing, but it's harder on Zoom. Well, basically, you guys are sort of sitting in that area where you're, I guess, supposed to be mostly experiencing fires in spring and summer. Would you say, yeah, that's right? Sure. And the reason why that's important is because the animals and plants that live around where you live are adapted to cope with fires that generally happen in that season. So they won't be in a vulnerable life stage during that time, because that would mean that they'd be at risk of potentially, you know, not surviving. So that's why fire season is important. However, what's been happening recently is this was taken, where was this taken? This was near Esk, actually. So this was in an area that's also supposed to be on a, oh gosh, it's not, oh gosh, I should mute that. Anyway, that's just me murmuring. This is an area that's not supposed to be burning at this time of year, but this was a few weeks ago. And I watched a dry lightning storm roll in, and I was actually driving down the highway while this lightning hit the ridge in front of me and ignited this wildfire. So that was an example of a fire that's happening outside of the usual fire season. And luckily this was able to be responded to straight away. I actually got to make the 000 call for this one, so I felt pretty good about myself. But that was just an indication of, this was while I was driving on my way to deliver a property fire management planning workshop. So yeah, it was kind of ironic. We were talking about all of this out of season fire weather happening, and this happened in front of my very eyes. The reason why fire extent is important to consider is because we really don't want these sorts of fires that impact the entire landscape at once, because that doesn't give things like animals anywhere to go. And I had this described really nicely to me, actually, by a Geringer elder, a mate of mine called Alfred, down on the south coast of New South Wales. And this isn't necessarily to say that this is the way everyone practices fire. This was how he practices fire. But basically, he was saying that if you could imagine a fire that trickles along through the leaf litter, and it's burning so slowly and so cool that a spider could crawl out from underneath a leaf that's on fire and go, oh, it's a bit hot, and crawl out under another leaf that's not on fire and find itself a safe refuge. And that's the type of fire that he puts on his country. Not necessarily, obviously, anything you could paint with a broad brush. But why I say that is because I think it's a really important way to start understanding patchiness. So not just patchiness, the importance of patchiness of fires on a big scale. So your mosaics, you know, a couple of meters by a couple of meters, a couple of kilometers by a couple of kilometers, but also patchiness on a centimetre scale as well is something that is important to consider. Fire extent is important for food post-fire, because if an entire landscape is scorched, takes out a lot of food for animals there, and it's all this homogeneous landscape that all looks the same. They don't have that variety. And they also don't have their habitats. They don't have places to hide, places to sleep, places to live. So really, again, I'm going to keep coming back to this. What we're aiming for is variability and patchiness and fire mosaics of different severity. And that's because our animals and plants have really complicated relationships with fire. I mean, Peter said it a couple of times, this stuff is complicated. But it's not to say that it's scary or overly complicated, and hopefully we can start to get our heads around it. But this is a picture of a glider, and gliders are super cool because they actually require, so if you know where gliders live, they live in tree hollows, right? And this is where I'd say, now, what causes tree hollows? So what causes tree hollows, if you have to think about it, is often fire, and not just one fire, but past fires over the space of 100 or so years with old trees that have eaten away and caused tree hollows. Gliders live in these hollows, so they need an area that has old trees that have experienced regular fire over the last 100 or 200 years in order to make those hollows for their homes. They also really love areas that have been recently burnt because they like to eat all the green shoots and little things that come up after a fire. But they also like to have adjacent nearby areas that are unburnt, that are all dense, so that they can hide away and escape from predators. So that's just one animal that requires these 3 different types of bush within their territory. And our plants have really interesting ways of coping with fire as well. So we talked about this epicormic resprouting before, where it looks like the trees are wearing woolly green jumpers. And while this is a stress response, it's actually quite an incredible one. They're able to put out all these fresh new growth and fresh new leaves so that they can regrow their canopy. And most of the trees in this photo here will actually survive this complete crown scorch, provided that the conditions post-fire are good. So provided that they get rain and continuous rain post-fire, and provided that they don't have a subsequent fire too soon. We also have some species that are killed by fire, but prolifically germinate from the soil stored seed bank after a fire. So this is an acacia, which I'm sure you all know, there's lots of them around Logan. Beautiful species. Some people think of them as weedy, but that's only because they're what we call a disturbance specialist. So they don't only love fire, and they love responding to fire very dramatically by growing really quickly and really densely. They'll do that for lots of disturbances too. So if you clear a track, you'll get acacias coming up because they love that bare earth. They're what we call pioneer species. So basically they come in after a disturbance event, right? Like a fire. They grow like the dickens really quickly. They really quickly put out flowers. And so that's so that they can get pollinated and they can set seed. And then they drop those seeds into the soil seed bank over the space of their lifetime. And now some of these acacias can have seeds that live dormant in the soil for decades, right? So you might have an area of bush that hasn't been burnt in a long time. You haven't seen an acacia there in ages. And then you put a fire on the ground, or you put a track through, you do some sort of soil disturbance and get that bare soil, and suddenly you've got acacias sprouting. And that's because they've been sitting there waiting for that moment as disturbance specialists. And they are important because they fix nitrogen into the soil. So they're legumes, you know, like your canola. You know, if you know anything about wheat and canola cropping, which some of you might, you'll know that when you do that, you put the canola in between the wheat harvests so that you don't have to put as much nitrogen fertilizer onto the soil. Because legumes like acacias and like canola, wattles, they actually fix nitrogen from the atmosphere and put it into the soil. So they're really important pioneer species. The other thing that fire does is it stimulates flowering. So your grass trees flower prolifically after fire. I think there's a statistic like, I don't know, it's like, you know, 80 times as many flower stalks get put up after a fire in flowering season for grass trees, your xanthorrhoeas, than if there hasn't been a fire. And these flower stalks are hundreds and hundreds of individual flowers on there, full of nectar and pollen that are really important food sources for birds and insects and animals that eat nectar as well. So all of this has basically been a way to describe to you guys that when we're talking about fire regime guidelines, we're talking about a complicated series of guidelines that takes into account the needs of as many different species found in as many different vegetation types as possible. So it's not just about protecting for koalas, or protecting for gliders or protecting for an orchid species. We're actually looking for fire regimes that have the most diverse outcomes. So we want to help protect the entire ecosystem and landscape as a whole. You guys have a bunch of, well, not a bunch of, but some beautiful rainforest in Logan. This is one of the vegetation types that we talk about as one that's one that actually is one of those Australian ones that doesn't require fire. And in fact, fire should be excluded from it. So when we go through your property fire management planning maps on the 13th, we're going to be delving into this more deeply, and we're going to be working out who has what vegetation on their property, and we're going to be mapping out what we're going to do about it. So in the case of rainforest, it's about excluding fire and strategically controlling the fuels around your rainforest and your gullies, if you do have it, so that fire doesn't get in there. Some of you might have some wet sclerophyll forests that has a fire interval that's very broad, and that's again because of these different requirements of different species. And these fire interval guidelines are simply that. They're just guidelines based on the best science that we know at the moment. Fire ecology is a constantly evolving science. So none of this is necessarily going to stay the same forever. We're constantly learning new things about it. And in fact, my PhD was based on wet sclerophyll forest and trying to nut out the details of these fire intervals. Some of you have grassy wet sclerophyll forest, which is slightly different from the shrubby type because it has shorter fire intervals. So this is your areas that are transitioning from wet sclerophyll forest into the more dry eucalypt forest. And then some of you have this dry eucalypt forest as well. Obviously, you're noticing a pattern here. As we get into the drier vegetation types, we're having these shorter fire intervals that are recommended. Right up to this grassy woodland, which some of you might have, where we've got quite a broad fire interval there, you can see, but anywhere as little as 8 years, but you know, hopefully no more than 40 years without a fire. So I did a brief overview there of the different intervals for different veg types, but if you want to know more about that, we're going to be diving straight into that when we've got the whole day to do it in person on the 13th. Basically, if you take away anything from tonight, it's that the Australian bush is shaped by a mix of many different fire regimes. So it's not about fire being good or fire being bad. It's much more complicated than that, but it's also much more interesting than that and much more exciting, in my opinion. Variability, variability, variability. That's my number one takeaway from these things. When you're thinking about what you're going to do on your property and you go away tonight and you have a chat with your neighbours about it, hopefully, maybe, we'd love you to be thinking long-term, as well as short-term, but also long-term, because on ecological timescales, these things are beyond our life cycles. And hopefully what we're going to get out of the mapping workshop on the 13th is a long-term property fire management plan for your property that you can pass on to the people that own your area after you do. We want you to find advice when you're unsure. So you've got me here, you've got Megan, you've got Peter. If we don't know the answers, we can hopefully point you in the direction of people that do. And the main thing we say is, if you are going to start thinking about this stuff and you're going to get planning on it, which we really encourage you to do, that we want you to start small. It doesn't have to be huge. It can be just a little corner. It can be just rake up in a pile burn if you've never done that before. It can be getting in contact with your local brigade, seeing what it might take to get a permit to do a little, you know, a little fuels reduction burn. But start. That's the most important thing. And come along. If you like what you heard tonight and you want to learn more about it, I really encourage you to take note of the email that you're going to get after tonight and sign up. What we're going to give you is maps of your property. We're going to have your vegetation mapped out, your fire hazard class mapped out, and we're going to be able to give you practical advice so that you can develop a document that you could even theoretically hand to someone like Megan. You know, if she comes to your door in an emergency, and say to her, hey, Megan, I did this map. I know where my fire trails are. I know you could turn a truck around at the end of that road. I know I've got a water tank here with a cam lock fitting on it that I know you could, you know, plug your hose into. So all that sort of stuff we're going to go through on the 13th. And so it actually was going to become hopefully a really useful working document for you. Yeah. So that is me done. I'm I'm going to put it back onto my mode. Oh, clapping, goodness. I'll stop sharing my screen, and we've got we've got some questions here, and we've got some time left before we have to wrap up. So yeah, if anyone has any questions, feel free to type them into the chat or just turn on your microphone and shout it out. I don't mind. We do have a few here. So Janelle, you've said, I did a fire management workshop in 2018, 2019. Should I do another one now as an update or refresher, or would it be someone taking someone else's place? You know what? I've had people come along to these workshops who've been to a couple before. Janelle, I'm sorry if I'm saying your name wrong, but did you get a map last time? Are you still online? Feel free to shout out. Anyway, if you didn't get a map last time, or even if you didn't, you want more. Oh, you did? Okay.
Yep, I did.
So if you want to come along, you're absolutely welcome to. Maybe you could bring your map along,
Okay.
and we might even be able to update it.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah.
I just wasn't sure. I thought maybe, taking someone's place.
No, I don't think so. We've we will have a cap on the people that can sign up, but to be honest, I think everyone's welcome. And if you've got something you want to chat about and you've got something you want to update, then absolutely we'd love to have you along.
Okay, thank you.
No worries. So Margaret has asked another question about, okay, so this is a specific one about Margaret's property. Is she able to do a burn on a half-acre suburban block in Daisy Hill? That might be a question for Peter.
Margaret, okay, now I understand. Yes, that is a very good question. I would actually really encourage you to have a chat with your local brigade. There are some urban restrictions in some areas for sure. You may find, though, because your area is fairly moist and you've got a good gully line, that you may not even have to do that. There are other ways of reducing fuel in urban areas where you don't have to go through all the hoops about getting permits to burn and all that sort of stuff.
I'm hoping my bush turkey will come back. My bush turkey was doing a really good job of making a mound and collecting all of the stuff.
Particularly on a small scale, talking about that patchy small scale, brush turkeys are incredible at turning over earth and burying that leaf litter.
And reducing the fuel. Yeah, that's perfect.
And they've been documented to reduce fuels, particularly on that fine scale on a small property.
So, I mean, the mound that they made last year was like 8 foot by 8 foot by 6 foot high.
They're incredible.
There's plenty more leaves and sticks that need to go onto it now.
Yeah.
But I didn't think I'd be allowed to do a burn here.
Yeah, look, that is a possibility, but have a chat with the local authorities because they will certainly have the precise information.
That'll be the Queensland Fire Service. It won't. I mean, we wouldn't be
Yeah.
rural.
So can I just maybe jump in on this one?
Go for it.
So the rural fire brigades in your local area. So we have, I would have to double check for Daisy Hill. Some areas fall into an urban zone, so technically it's the fire and rescue station that would issue the permit, but the rural fire service can still provide advice and guidance on that burn. And with your permit, you'll get conditions you can light into, and it's also just about letting your neighbours know. So one thing with permits is, I can't remember if it's mandatory, but it's definitely strongly encouraged that you give your neighbours notice that you're planning to do a burn, so they can be prepared to close their windows and doors and avoid that smoke hazard. But otherwise, obviously I can't speak for your area, I'm not sure, but most of the time that shouldn't be any problem as long as you've got the permit, or if it's under 2 meters by 2 meters by 2 meters in any direction, you don't have to have a permit either. Just depends on what sort of burn you're trying to do.
Interesting. Yeah.
If you're ever uncomfortable with doing a burn though, whether it's a smaller burn or larger burn, usually rural fire brigades are more than willing to come out. So obviously it depends on their availability. But I know at our brigade, if a community member has a genuine concern about risks to their property, we will go and help them with their burn regardless of size and help them with that permit too where we can.
Yeah, okay. Well, so I didn't even know there would be rural fire brigades, being as I'm living in the middle of suburbia. That didn't sound right at all.
Yeah, I can well, I might be able to have a little bit of a look for your what's near you after this and get back to you on that.
Thank you.
Yeah. So do we have any other questions? Feel free to shout out. There's no such thing as a silly question. So all and any can get answered. Or anything else that you'd like to add, any input that you have. And if not,
can you tell me where and when, what hours for the 13th, and what day of the week's that?
it's Saturday. And for the where, I'm going to pass over to Peter.
We will be in Jimboomba on the 13th. We have 2 sites and we're just negotiating with them at the moment which particular one, but it's probably going to be the council community centre.
No, I can't go that far. I'm not well enough to travel as far as Jimboomba, but thanks anyway.
That's all right, Margaret. I'm very happy to have a chat with you as an aside in the next week or two anyway about your specific block. That'd be fine.
Yeah, as long as you don't tell me to knock my trees down, because I mean, like my tree, you can't see my house. You can't see my house on aerial Google.
I'm hardly going to do
away.
that. Yeah, no, that's fine. I'll get in contact with you, Margaret. It'll be fine.
Thanks, Peter.
Yeah, good on you. Cheers.
So Karen's just said and made a really good point here, for the smaller sites, maybe could collect debris together and have a manageable bonfire, so a pile burn, we might call that. And when Megan mentioned before that you don't need to have a permit if you have one fire that is less than 2 meters wide by 2 meters high by 2 meters long, right? So you're only allowed one of those sized fires per property. So you can't do multiple pile burns at the same time without a permit. But if you just wanted to do one pile burn or bonfire, rake up all your stuff, and it's going to be less than 2 by 2 by 2, then you don't need to have a permit for that.
Day after day after day.
Yeah, but you can only have one at a time per property unless you get a permit.
I just had a look for Daisy Hill just to see what was around. So you do just fall out of Rural Fire Brigade area. So it would be a fire and rescue written permit. However, you do have a local brigade near you and a couple of fire wardens. So there's a Brisbane headquarters Rural Fire Brigade, which sounds weird. It's not in Brisbane. And there's a few fire wardens. So I could recommend if you contact, I'll put the number in the chat of the area office for Rural Fire Service, and they can assist you further. They may even have, depending on the burn power, to write the permit for you, but that's a conversation you need to have with them.
Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. So if anyone has any final last words or questions or thoughts, feel free to let me know. Otherwise, we're finishing up right on time. So I don't know what's on telly tonight, but hopefully you've not missed your favourite show. And yeah, we're really looking forward to seeing you on May 13th. And if you have any neighbours here, any neighbours around you that didn't come tonight but you think might be interested, tap them on the shoulder, knock on the door, let them know, because the more the merrier. So I'll get Megan and Peter, I guess we'll get you guys to stick on after everyone else logs off. But thank you so much, everyone. And yeah, see you on the 13th.
Thanks, folks. Have a good evening.
Have a good night.